Stu Taylor here, and joining us, Walter Coles, the CEO of Virginia Energy Resources, Inc. It's traded on the TSX.V venture. The symbol is VAE. Walter, it's great to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Well, energy, just a big topic. Big, huge topic. We're utilizing what we have. There's so much bad publicity out, constraints, regulations, compliance issues. What's the status right now? I'm familiar with Virginia Energy, but what's been going on in recent weeks and recent months?
Well, for our company, the biggest impact has been the Fukushima incident. We're a uranium production and an exploration company, and certainly that's had a negative impact. It created very negative sentiment on our sector. But the United States is still importing 90% of its uranium. We need to develop domestic sources of production. Our company has the largest uranium deposit in the United States, so we are the path forward for the U.S. to create more energy independence, at least in terms of nuclear power. And just to say something about nuclear power, nuclear is the only form of baseload electricity generation that does not generate CO2 gases. So our view is that nuclear power is going to have a growth profile over the next 1-2 decades and longer.
And if we want to become energy independent, you've got to look at France, the utilization of nuclear plants. We utilize gas, oil, and nuclear power, and coal, shale in this country. We're not doing it. It's the road. It's the road really to independence and lack of dependence on foreign input. How much of this is politically generated?
Well, I think all of it's politically generated. I mean, there are people who have I think a misguided view that windmills and solar power are the solution.
50 years it may be.
Right. And it's just non-competitive as a form of energy generation. First of all, it's not baseload, it's intermittent. You can't count on wind to always be there. You can't count on solar to be there. If you go out and build 3,000 megawatts of wind power, you end up having to build duplicative capacity to back it up. So then it raises the question, why even build the wind power to start with? Baseload power is coal and nuclear.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to have a position here, but boy, do I support what you're saying. And yet, are we starting to see a little bit of a shift here? Uranium, which went up to what, 138, 140, and then dipped. We coming back?
Well, we were coming back. We went from the 30s up to 72. Then we had Fukushima, and so we dropped back down to the lower 40s. Now we're in the 50s. The driver is going to be the build out of new nuclear power plants. And I'll highlight one country that I think is a particularly noteworthy example. After the incident of Fukushima, a month later, Saudi Arabia announced plans to build 16 nuclear power plants. The reason? Because they don't want to use oil to generate electricity. They want to sell that oil to the West at $100 a barrel. And I think, right there is a glaring example of why we don't want to be, the sucker who's paying $100 a barrel for oil and not generating our own oil and our own electricity via nuclear power, for instance.
So how's all of this reflected on the stock of your company, and what's your short range, middle range, and long range plan?
The biggest milestone for us is coming up, and it's a clearance to begin developing our uranium deposit in Virginia. And that clearance is pending the lifting of a moratorium in Virginia. The state of Virginia has undertaken a study. We'll ask the National Academy of Science to do a study on the feasibility of uranium mining occurring in Virginia. And that study is due out at the beginning of December. And we would hope to have a bill in the state legislature, pending the results of that study in the next session. So for us, the outcome of that study and what happens in the state legislature is going to drive the stock, not 10%, not 20%, but it probably will have an enormous impact on the stock price.
Quote, layman's question, how much of this have you got? How much can you utilize, and how does that convert into value?
Well, we have 119 million pounds of defined uranium resource in the ground. It's the largest energy project in the state of Virginia, period. I mean, if you turned it into oil equivalent, it would be 7.5 billion barrels of oil in terms of the BTU equivalent. Like, hands down, there's nothing else in Virginia, no windmill project, no solar project comes close. No coal project in Virginia comes close to the kind of energy that would be released by developing this uranium deposit.
So in this down economy, and I mean down psychologically too, let's call it as it is, people are resistant, fear drives the markets, speculation. What do you tell investors when they look at your company?
Well, I tell investors that we try to keep our heads down and do our job and move our project forward. what happens in the short term, there's a lot of volatility, month to month, and it's impossible to plan and live your life, based on that. You got to have a long-term vision, a long-term goal. And so we know what we need to do over the long term, and through these enormous swings in the stock market, we stick to our plan. And we think that over the long term, that will deliver significant value to our shareholders.